What's up, U.S. History? Mr. Taluki here with some notes for you. Today I'm throwing a lot at you, so make sure you do check my other postings. You should see 3 total. Another one has a time zone map attached to it, and then there's a corresponding quiz. So those 2 things would go together. That's the only assignments that you actually have due today is completing that quiz and looking over the time zone material. Everything on this video is just going to be stuff that you're going to add to your U.S. history notes. Now, I say U.S. history notes, but we kind of have a couple different pages going. So I kind of explained this in my notes, but to reiterate for you, we had progressive era notes that we've done a quiz on, and we will come back to that stuff. Don't throw them away. You're going to want to keep that at least through the quarter 1 exam, because quite a few exam questions, if you were doing a good job on notes, will be accounted for on there. Then we had started the Teddy Roosevelt kind of like biography profile, where I was just showing you images of him, but I'm telling you some key things about him that I want you to write down, which will also be exam questions. Hopefully you started a separate page where I think about 1 page of line paper will be enough for all of the Teddy Roosevelt stuff. And then today I want you to do a 3rd page. So have a new fresh page out. Or actually, you started it probably yesterday with those the 17-1 like note highlights or the book notes where you had got some vocab terms. I promise not to ever have you doing more than 3 sets of notes concurrently. The reason I'm doing it this way is, you can look at different time periods in American history from different vantage points or different angles. So right now, we, like all of the units we're hitting and all of these different aspects, we're looking at the time period between 1890 and 1920, and we will be for probably the rest of the marking period. The progressive era stuff is domestic policy. We're looking at laws and changes, reforms that are happening inside the country. The Roosevelt stuff is just looking at a really impactful American and one of my favorite presidents who did a lot of cool stuff. So that's just on one individual. And then these notes that we had kind of started yesterday, where you were getting terms out of the book, and then we're continuing on with this video lecture today. This is all foreign policy stuff. It's how America is interacting with the rest of the world, how America is starting to become a world power and become, flexing its muscles and becoming kind of, sort of, arguably an empire. All right. So if you hadn't already yesterday, the notes that you were supposed to get, where it was some key vocab terms and you were looking at arguments for expansion, I would put a heading on there, like something like America becomes a world power or American foreign policy, 1890 to 1920. Any heading like that would be helpful. And we will have a quiz coming up probably later this week or early next week that'll tie into it. All right. First up, what I have for you, let me shrink my beautiful face on here for you. 2 different political cartoons. Now, I always tell kids that, hey, if you can go back and look at political cartoons from a past era of history, then you're pretty savvy and you probably have a good understanding of history. I wouldn't expect you guys to have to be able to go decode and understand political cartoons from the progressive era or this 1890 to 1920 era yet, but I like to throw some at you, and later on in the year, we probably will do some assignments where after I've taught a unit to you, you'll try to go and explain and analyze cartoons for me. This one, both of these cartoons tie into what's called the Monroe Doctrine. The Monroe Doctrine is nothing that's new. You would have actually learned about it probably at some point early last year in 8th grade social studies. Mr. Fry would have talked about it at some point. Monroe was our 5th president. He was the last of the founding fathers that was around during the American Revolution to become president. Okay, he was getting to be an old guy when he was the top guy and president of the United States. The Monroe Doctrine, now this is something, even though I don't have it written out on the slide, you should have this accounted for in your notes. Hint, hint, this might be a quiz or a test question coming up. So for the Monroe Doctrine, essentially what the message was, it said that America was sending a message to European countries saying, do not come and try to build an empire in North or South America, in the Western Hemisphere. We basically said, this is our turf. And if you come in and try to beat up some smaller, weaker country in North or South America, well, you might be able to beat up Mexico or Guatemala or Brazil, but you're going to have to think twice before you tangle with America, and we have their back. Like if you go in and invade them, you're also going to have to deal with America. So I kind of threw a long definition at you. You don't have to write every single thing I said down. I want you to sum that up, though, that America was giving a message with the Monroe Doctrine to European countries saying, Western Hemisphere, North and South America is our turf. It's our backyard. Don't come over here and try to build an empire. Now, if they already had territory, like for example, Great Britain controlled Canada. Canada was part of the British Empire at the time. We weren't saying we would go to war with you and try to kick you out of places you already controlled. But we were saying that you don't take any new territory. And if you do, you're going to have to mess with the Americans. Now, these two political cartoons both tie into the Monroe Doctrine, so follow my cursor there. This guy, who is it? What did you say there? Who is it? Uncle Sam, of course, who, now there never really was an actual Uncle Sam. He is a fictionalized character that represents kind of like the United States government. His story actually goes back to like the War of 1812, where there were barrels of food that were stamped U.S., property of U.S. And I guess a rumor started going around with American soldiers that some rich old farmer named Uncle Sam was supporting the war effort and he was sending us food. Now, that's not what the U.S. stood for. It obviously stood for United States. But that was a rumor that got going 100 years before this time, and it had just always kind of stuck. And you've probably seen Uncle Sam in other like American propaganda or military recruitment posters and stuff. So that guy, Uncle Sam, in this cartoon is representing America. And then over here, you can't make these ones out quite as good, but you have like a short, chubby British guy, a Frenchman, and a Dutch guy. And you have the world split into two hemispheres. This is the Western Hemisphere. Over there is the Eastern Hemisphere. And you can see Uncle Sam has thrown his hat, his stars and stripe hat, right in between North and South America. The message is, hey, this is our turf. We're claiming this. Basically, you Europeans, you can do whatever you want in the Eastern Hemisphere. In Africa, in Asia, Australia, over in Europe, do whatever you want. That's not our business. But over here, it is our business. So if you come in and mess with any of these countries over here, you're going to be messing with the U.S. too. The other cartoon, now I have my cursor over kind of in the middle, also supposed to be Uncle Sam, although he's drawn by a different artist. And you can see Uncle Sam has the Monroe Doctrine Club, and he's standing with a leg on the top of North America and the bottom of South America, essentially saying, we claim this turf. This is our backyard. And if you come over here and mess with any of it, we're going to club you with the Monroe Doctrine. All right. Next up. I think this is a very important thing to have for, and if you ever can't see my notes because of my face on there, I will start attaching them to just a copy of my Google Slides. So you can look at that separately if you want. An important concept for kind of this time period and moving forward is, I heard my favorite historian, a guy named Dan Carlin, who's a great storyteller, a great historian, say America has a split personality. And what he meant by that was, it's kind of like a two-sided coin. We have two personalities within us as a nation, where on the one hand, all of our founding principles are about freedom and liberty and individual rights, and that we're trying to get rid of tyranny and, the oppressive King George III. We wanted him out of here, and we wanted to have our own representative government. So on the one hand, Americans love freedom. They're all about individual liberties and people having freedom and doing what they want. On the other hand, this time period we're coming into, all of the strong countries in the world were building empires. They were taking colonies. They were conquering other people, and they were adding them to their own turf and then kind of bossing the people in the conquered territories around and exploiting their resources and labor. So America wanted to be a strong country too. We felt like, hey, we're just as tough as the British, the French, the Germans, any of those other countries over there. And just recently, the American West had, like, the frontier was closed. There was no more Wild West and cowboys and Indians and all of that stuff going on. Now there's transcontinental rail lines, like, all of that territory is starting to get turned into states. It's kind of been like civilized, you might say. So the split personality again, on the one hand, Americans are all about freedom and liberty and like people being able to do what they want. On the other hand, we want to be a strong, powerful nation too. And part of being a strong, powerful nation is we need to go and conquer other places and get in fights and take more land. So those two things constantly come in conflict with each other, because how can you justify going and conquering other people if you're going to go take their freedom away? It's like, if we truly believe all people should be free and have liberty, how can we go take somebody else's freedom and liberty away? I hope that makes sense. If you're unclear on it, shoot me an email and I can explain it in a little more depth to you. All right, adding on to some notes for today. So here are the arguments for the imperialists. People that thought we should go out and conquer more territory. This kind of sums up a lot of the big arguments out there, the things that they were saying. Now, to sum them up real quick, and you'd want to add a few of these things into your notes. So imperialist arguments: the frontier, the old West, had been closed. That we need new territory to conquer. We need to keep on our toes and keep our fighting spirit going. We need new challenges, essentially. Another way of saying that. That we would get soft if we didn't have like people to fight and challenges and obstacles to overcome. That we need to be respected. And how do you get respected? You go out there and you use your military and you rough up other countries and you show how tough you are. That we needed more bases. America, even though we didn't have a massive ground army, we had been a naval power for quite a while. In fact, the only country back in this time period that had a stronger and a bigger, better navy than us was Great Britain. And they had long been known as the premier naval power on planet Earth. Today, America has the biggest navy. But you go back 100 years ago, anything like before World War II, the British had the best navy, but America was a pretty close second. And having a good navy, like these old ships, they didn't have nuclear reactors on them like they do today, where they can run for months and months, years at a time. They were fueled up by coal. So you had to have coaling stations or at bases around the world if you wanted your Navy to actually function. So that was an argument, too, that we needed to take more islands and more bases around the world so that we had fueling stations for our ships. And then the last one, this one might seem kind of weird and messed up and backwards by today's standards, but it was a strong argument back at the time that America is predominantly a Christian country and we're a democracy. And it was that, hey, all these other people in poor countries around the world, they might not be ready for democracy yet, but we need to teach them about our system. And then maybe someday they'll be able to govern themselves. But for now, we should go kind of show them what to do, and they can learn from us. And, well, they don't know about Jesus, and they don't know how to get to heaven, so we should go save their souls too. We can go preach the good word and the gospel and convert these people to Christianity. So I know today that might seem kind of backwards to us and not like a legit idea, but it was a very serious argument back at that time. All right, the anti-imperialist arguments. So the people that were saying, no, we're all about freedom and liberty, so how we'd be such hypocrites if we go and try to take away somebody else's freedom and liberty. All right? Their arguments kind of were that other people deserve freedom too. That if America goes and takes somebody else's freedom away after we had just fought a revolution against the British, trying to break away from the oppression of King George III, if you remember that from 8th grade social studies, that we would be hypocrites or we'd be very guilty of hypocrisy. Hypocrisy is like me saying like something is bad for you, but then I go turn around and do it. Like, or something's good for me, but you shouldn't have it. You shouldn't enjoy these freedoms. So that's what hypocrisy is. You might want to jot that down in your notes too. That it's racist. I mean, that was starting to become a claim too. That some of the more maybe enlightened people of the day said, we're looking at these darker skinned people and saying they're uncivilized and they're not Christian and they don't understand democracy, but man, that's kind of just being racist. Maybe they just have a different way of doing things. Maybe they have a different religion and a different perspective. Other arguments for it were that it's going to cost too much money. That why do we need to spend that much money on our military and going and doing these foreign conquests? Are we really going to get that much in return? Another one is that we would lose American lives. If we're going to go conquer other places, well, we might win a lot of battles, but we're going to take some casualties and losses too. So that was a big argument against it. And then that cheap labor would actually hurt U.S. workers. That, a lot of the people in these poorer lands that we were thinking about maybe taking, those people lived in poverty. They didn't make as much money as the average American. And because of that, if we went and set up factories over there, most of those workers would probably work at a lower wage. And if businessmen in America can go outsource factories, like building a factory in China, if you could pay people less over there, well, then you're taking jobs away from Americans, good paying jobs. So that was kind of a big argument that tied into all this too. Last thing I got for you today, and then I'll zip it and we'll finish up this PowerPoint another day down the road, is jingoism. Jingoism it's kind of like a nationalism that I'm going to have you get in your notes too, where it's like nationalism is thinking your country is better than every other country. Jingoism is a little spin on that. It came from an old British drinking song that British naval officers would sing in the bar when they came back into port. But essentially what it means is you want your country to have a very aggressive foreign policy. You want to go out there and beat people up. So like the people that were in favor of imperialism, that wanted to go conquer other places, they would often be called like jingoists, or they'll say they have a jingoist attitude, or they're very find jingoism appealing. So that just means that we're going to like spread American ideas around the world, and we're going to do that by going out and being aggressive and conquering other places. All right, that's all I got for you today. Hopefully all those notes made sense. If you need to, go ahead and give it a rewatch. If you still have questions about anything, shoot me an email. I'll get back with you. A couple key things that you'd want to have in your notes today.